Hi again, everyone. So the lesson for today, we're going to be looking at not just one of the short stories like we have been doing for the recent past and before the Christmas holidays. We're going to be looking at some links between the stories, and we're going to start that today by looking at the endings of the stories. And how they link together, and what sort of common themes that we can see coming up in the endings of each of the four Iain Crichton Smith short stories. One thing that I should say is if you haven't completed the um, the the lessons for setting and characterization, that includes the tasks that were included in those. Can you please stop this video just now and go back and make sure you complete these? You should only be coming on to this lesson that I'm doing now on the links between the stories once you've finished with setting and characterization in the short story Home. Okay, so we're going to start today by talking about just reminding ourselves about the endings of the short stories, just in a sort of general way. It might be helpful if you've got some paper in front of you, if you can copy this table down, so you can just pause this video here, copy this table down, and then I've just summarised the ending for each of the short stories, and I'm just going to talk about each ending one by one. So the first story that I'm going to start with is the telegram. So the ending to this story was quite interesting because it totally subverts our expectations of what we think is going to happen. At the end of the telegram, if you'll remember, it's actually revealed that the telegram that the thin women and the fat women are so afraid of, that was never meant for them. It was never meant for anybody else in their village that they were friends with. It was in fact meant for the elder himself, because it was actually the elder's son who had died. So it was his telegram that he had all along. That's a really interesting twist on the story, because it does, like I say, subvert our expectations, which is something that Iain Crichton Smith likes to do in a lot of his stories. He likes to give us something unexpected, and doesn't like to tie up his story with a conclusion that we can see coming. So we certainly didn't see that coming at the end of the telegram, and all of that tension that has built up as the elder is walking closer and closer towards the thin women and the fat women. It the tension just then dissipates, because it's actually the elder himself who is, if you remember in the story, he is the symbol of death, because he's all dressed in black and he carries this this weapon in his hand, this telegram, that can just absolutely decimate and wipe out an entire family, destroy a family in one fell swoop, just by saying this telegram is for you and your son has died in the war. But in fact, the bringer of death is actually bringing death to his own door, although he doesn't. Although the fat women and the thin women don't know that until the end of the story. So that's the telegram gives us a little bit of a twist there in the end, which gives the reader a bit of a thrill at the end. Similarly, in Mother and Son, there is a not quite a twist in the ending, but it does still subvert our expectations. So all throughout the story Mother and Son, John has been locked in this bitter conflict with his mother, who is lying in her bed as she insults him and berates him and drags his character down, calls him names. And then at the end of the story, we expect, and I remember you guys were expecting as we were reading this story in class, for John to do something to his mum, for him to be violent towards his mother. But he doesn't. John doesn't harm his mother, which is what the reader is expecting him to do. He actually turns from her and he opens the door. So the fact that he turns his back on her is very symbolic. Having his back to her means that he is leaving her behind. He is about to walk into a new life and leave her at his back, leave her in his past. The fact that he opens the door is symbolic of him opening the door to his new life, to his newfound freedom, to his independence. So again, in that way, we expected one thing, which is John to harm his mother, and Iain Crichton Smith delivered something completely different, which was a more hopeful and uplifting ending and experience for the reader, for us to enjoy and be uplifted that John, our main character, is, instead of consigning himself to a life in prison by harming his mother, he is actually going to better himself and better his life, and that is so joyful and uplifting as an ending. The Red Door is very similar to Mother and Son in quite a lot of ways. So if you remember in The Red Door, we learn about Murdo's relationship with the community that he lives in. He is very isolated because he wants to break out of the conformity of the village life, but he feels like he can't really, and it's not until he wakes up one morning and sees that someone has painted his door red, which no one else in the village has a door that's painted red, that he starts to gain the courage to live life according to his own rules and not to conform to the rules of the village. We learn, or we are given hints, I should say. We don't learn this, it's never given as fact, but we are given hints throughout the story that it was actually this woman Mary, who lives in the village, that had painted Murdo's door red. Some of the hints that are given to us is that she likes to wear a lot of like red clothes and things like that, which is seen to be quite unusual in the village as well, because they're so bright and nobody else wears that kind of clothing. So Mary's seen to be a kind of loose cannon, like she does what she wants, she wears what she wants, she reads a lot of books, which is frowned upon in the village as well, and she's not afraid to be herself, to be a free spirit. Murdo wants to live that sort of life, but he is afraid of being judged, of being shunned by the village people, but because he now has this red door, he starts to think about all the possibilities of how he could live his life. And he becomes very, very brave towards the end of the story, after thinking about how he could live his life, and what he could do with his life now. And he goes to visit Mary, and he the end of the story, it just finishes there. We don't get to see what happens with Mary, we don't get to see what her reaction is, if she really did paint his door red, what kind of conversation that they have. It just ends with him knocking purposefully on her door, and he's standing and he's waiting for an answer. So again, this is an ending much like Mother and Son that is very hopeful and uplifting. So it's kind of different to the telegram. Again, it's something that we don't quite expect. We don't really expect Murdo to go to Mary's house at the end, but we do get hints all the way through the story that he is going to change his life. He is going to live for himself. He is going to be an individual, and that knocking on the door, that symbolises his reach for another life, and his step through that door, through the red door, into another sort of existence, another life where he can be independent, he can be himself, he doesn't have to conform to the whims of the village anymore. And that's the same as John in Mother and Son. The door symbolises his freedom from sort of conformity and oppression, I guess you could say it is as well. The environment that John lives in is quite oppressive, much like the environment that Murdo lives in is very oppressive, and both of them walk through a door into a different life. So those endings for Mother and Son and the Red Door are very, very similar in that they both have the same symbol, the door, and they are both uplifting and hopeful endings. It gives us hope for the characters and the characters' futures. The last one that I wanted to show you was, I wanted to talk about was home. I've just moved the grid to the side a little bit because I'm going to just talk a little bit about some other notes in a second. But the ending for home, home is what the story we've done most recently. So if you remember the ending of home, Jackson and his wife, they've been through the streets of Glasgow, gone back to visit the tenement that they both used to live in, and realise it's not really a place that they can call home anymore. They don't feel at home there, they don't feel comfortable. They then end up, at the end of the story, they end up in a first class hotel, and it is here that they start to feel more like home. So at the end, Jackson no longer considers Glasgow, where he was born, to be his home, and the reader is sort of left to their own devices to wonder, does Jackson really think that Africa is now his home? Because that's where he's been living for 35 years. Could be, but it's more likely to be that on a deeper level, home for Jackson and for us is not a place, but it's actually a mindset. Jackson doesn't just feel at home in Africa, he doesn't just feel at home in the first class hotel because of the buildings or where they are. He feels at home when he is with people and in environments that are of a certain social status. So with people who are of a similar social standing to him, that's when he feels at home. And the same for Mrs. Jackson as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what these endings of the 4 short stories have in common. I talked quite a lot up there about Mother and Son and the Red Door, but what about the rest of them? So all of them subvert expectations, which is what I was talking about as I was going through the endings for each of the short stories. They subvert expectations on different levels though. So for example, the telegram subverts expectations quite heavily. We do not expect at all for this telegram to have been directed to the elder. So that is why that is a twist in the story. A twist in the story is when the author gives us something that's almost the complete opposite of what we would have expected to happen. And Iain Crichton Smith does that with the telegram. With Mother and Son, Iain Crichton Smith subverts expectations, but to a lesser degree. We don't expect John to sort of just turn away from his mum. We think that he is going to be violent because Iain Crichton Smith has given us hints all the way through the story that John could be violent. Remember, he talks about the red grids in his eyes and things like that. He talks about how wild the character is and things. So we think that his mother is going to come to harm at his hands, but he then does the non-violent act of turning his back and looking out of the door, and then we expect that he probably walked out of the door and left that life. That's not a twist though. It's not so out of the realms of possibility that it's a twist in the tale like the telegram is. It still subverts expectations, but to a lesser degree than the telegram. The Red Door as well subverts expectations, but again to an even lesser degree than the telegram and Mother and Son. We know that Murdo wants to change his life. He tells us all of the things throughout the story that he wants to do, that he has previously believed that he cannot do in the village. He thinks he's going to be cast out and shunned and sent away, sent packing. But now, instead of that idea of being shunned by the villagers, instead of that being a scary thought, he actually starts to enjoy it and he wants it, which is why he then goes up to Mary's house and knocks on her door. It's the act of going to Mary's house and involving himself in her life that subverts our expectations. All throughout the story we think that Murdo is going to go it alone, he's going to go and have his own individual life, and then he goes that step further and thinks, no, hold on a minute, there's Mary, who's been living in the village. She already doesn't conform to the ideals. I want to kind of hang out with her. And that's what subverts our expectations. So on a sort of lower scale than the telegram and mother and son. And with home as well, our home is sort of different in the way that it subverts our expectations from the rest of the three short stories. It subverts our expectations not in the plot and what happens in the action of the end of the story, but it subverts our expectations in the message that we get. The word home tends to have connotations of a place for most people. So when we see that the short story is titled Home, and then we start to read that the action takes place in Glasgow, and there's quite a lot of flashbacks to Jackson's life in Glasgow, then we think that home, as the story's titled, must be to do with Glasgow. However, Crichton Smith subverts our expectation that home is Glasgow by giving us this message at the end that home is not actually, in fact, a physical place. It's a mindset. It's how you think, and the people that you feel comfortable with. That's what creates a home for Jackson, and indeed for most people. Some of the short stories provide hope or comfort in different ways as well. Not all of them, but the ones that do provide hope or comfort, they often do this very, very differently. So if we go first of all to Mother and Son and the Red Door. So those two, I had said previously, they provide hope and comfort to the reader because the endings are really hopeful. Both of the main characters in those stories, so John in Mother and Son and Murdo in the Red Door, they are embarking on a new life. They are sort of shaking off the chains and the shackles of their the conformity of the villages that they live in, the conformity of that village life that is a theme throughout all of these stories, and they're going on to more purposeful and individualistic lives where they can do what they want. They can live life according to their own rules. Similarly, in the telegram, the ending of the telegram does provide hope in a slightly different way. Obviously, there's no hope for the elder. We know that the elder's son has died, and the elder is walking through the streets somnambulistically, so like he's sleepwalking. So the word somnambulistic is used at the end to show that the elder's sort of sleepwalking through the village, not knowing what to do with his life anymore, and that's a tragic ending for him. However, the hope and the comfort doesn't come for the elder, but the elder isn't our main character. Our main characters are the thin women and the fat women, and they're the ones that get the hope and the comfort. Their hope and their comfort comes from the fact that the telegram that time wasn't for them. Their sons are still alive, so they can go about their lives as normal for the time being. So very, very different in the way that hope and comfort is conveyed in the telegram. Again, for home, hope and comfort being provided is done in a slightly different way. So as Jackson no longer considers Glasgow to be his home, he is comforted by the fact that he is in an environment and a situation in the shape of the first class hotel, surrounded by all of those like-minded, rich people that he feels most comfortable and most at home with. That's where his comfort comes from, and that's where his hope comes from. He can leave Glasgow behind now because he now knows that he feels most at home in Africa. Not because it's in Africa, not because of the place, but because of the people that he surrounds himself with now that are so like him. So that is where Jackson's hope and comfort comes from. I've already discussed the symbol of the door, but I'll just touch on it again. In Mother and Son and the red door, the symbol of the door is very, very important, because that is the door to freedom, to individuality, to a new life for both John and Murdo. So please, when you're writing about endings of the short stories, please make sure that you write about the symbols of the doors leading to that brand new life. Now, I've also gone through the short stories, and I have picked out some quotations for the endings for each of the short stories, and I'm going to just talk to you about what the quotations are that I would use if I was writing about the endings and what they have in common with each other. Because remember, the whole point of this lesson is to think about how the endings link together, what they have in common with each other. Okay, so you're not looking at the endings individually, you're looking at them and thinking about, right, what do the endings have in common here? So the quotations that I've chosen, I'll talk you through, and I'll talk you through how to analyse them in terms of being able to find the links between all four of the endings. So the first one from the telegram is this. At the end of the telegram it says, "The elder had a telegram directed to himself to tell him of the drowning of his own son." So this is when the fat woman and the thin woman first learn that the telegram was actually for the elder. The elder's already walked by the window, so they know that it's not for either of them, because he's not knocked on the door to say, "Here's your telegram." But they learn later on that the telegram is actually for him. So in this quotation here, you can see that there are three words that I've highlighted here that are all pronouns. So himself, him, and his. The reason that Iain Crichton Smith has used these pronouns in such close vicinity to each other is to highlight that this grief and this death belongs to the elder. He owns it. Not only does he own that telegram, so it's to drive home that idea that the telegram belongs to the elder, but not only is that his property, not only does he have ownership of the telegram, he now has ownership of this idea of having a dead child, which is supposed to drive home the tragedy of war at this time, and that theme of the destructiveness of war. The fact that that was given to you, your child, your son, who you probably hadn't seen for months, maybe years, the fact that the news of your child's death was given to you, like handed to you just on a piece of paper, was like, that's yours, you take care of it, you now own it. And that is why these pronouns have been used in such close vicinity, to highlight the fact that the death of the son belongs to the elder and to no one else. The next quotation is for Mother and Son, and this is for the ending where we see that, in reference to the mother, she was asleep, curled up in the warmth, with the bitter, bitter smile upon her face. Then he walked to the door, opened it, and stood listening to the rain. Now I just want to show you something very quickly, because I had put put an ellipsis here. That's the wrong one, sorry. I put an ellipsis here because I wanted to use this whole quotation, but I didn't want to put the whole thing in because it was too long, but I want to show you the bit that I'm going to be analysing. So here's the first line. She was asleep, curled up in the warmth, with a bitter, bitter smile on her face. He stood there for a long moment while an equally bitter smile curled up the edge of his lips. Then he walked to the door, opened it, and stood listening to the rain. So John and his mother have been described in much the same way. with this bitter smile. So because the word bitter, this word choice of bitter, has been used to describe the mother's smile, but then later in the next sentence has been used to describe John's smile, equates John with his mother for a moment. It lets the reader see that there is a resemblance there is a family resemblance. John's going to turn his back on his mother. He's going to walk out the door and go and have a better life and go and live for himself. However, they are still family, and that's the reminder to the reader that Iain Crichton Smith wants to give, that John can also be bitter just like his mum is. Can I just say one thing actually, guys, just while I'm bringing up these I'm talking about the analysis of these quotations. The analysis that's going to come up on the PowerPoint is just very, 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 very short. So please don't think that this is all that you would have to write. That's just on this PowerPoint. You would have to explain this in much more detail. So again, for word choice, for bitter, you would have to discuss connotations and things like that, much like we've talked about in class. So these are just notes that are coming up on the PowerPoint that I'm talking through. It would be up to you to be able to develop it into a clear and developed and sophisticated answer that looks at connotations. Okay, so just keep that in mind. The other section of the quotation that I'm going to analyse is, then he walked to the door, opened it and stood listening to the rain. So this is where the reader's expectation is subverted, because with John's bitter smile, with the connotations of bitter, it's usually you're looking at something you're disgusted by, that you don't like, and the fact that he then turns his back on his mother, that subverts the reader's expectation, because we think with his bitter smile that he's going to turn on her, that he's maybe going to attack her. But he doesn't. He walks away. He abandons any sort of violence or confrontation that could have come from all of her sort of depraved way of speaking to him. The word door as well, I just wanted to highlight to you again that this is a symbol. It's a symbol of the freedom, of individuality, independence, and a rejection of conformity, like I'd spoken about before. Now the quotation for the red door, at the ending of the red door, it's one of the quotations is, it said, "Please let me live my own life. He knocked on the door." Now, just very importantly, the word "it" here refers to the red door. So Murdo has stopped and he's looking at the red door, and that's when the Iain Crichton Smith writes, "It said." So it's like the door is saying to Murdo, "Please let me live my own life." Like the door doesn't want to be painted over. Like, please just leave me be. I like to be read. Let me just be read. So with that is a very good little bit of personification that Iain Crichton Smith has done on the door, because this mirrors Murdo's own thoughts. The door wants to be left alone to be read, and Murdo wants to be left alone to be his own individual self. He knocked on the door. Again, the door symbolises freedom, individuality, independence, and rejection of conformity, much like the door does in Mother and Son. With home, the quotation at the end is, "With a piercing stab of pain, he recalled Africa, the drinkers on the veranda, the sky large and open and protective, the place where one knew where one was, among Europeans like oneself." What's quite odd here is that he has talked about how he is feeling pain because he's recalling Africa, but the thing that he enjoys about Africa is being among Europeans. So that tells you all you need to know about the message that Iain Crichton Smith is trying to get across about what home is. Home is not about being in Africa. It's about being in an environment where you can be around like-minded people, like yourself. So I'm going to look at the part of this quotation, the piercing stab of pain, first of all. So this indicates just how much it hurts Jackson to be away from his home, which is Africa. Like, he thinks of Africa with fondness. I'm sure everybody has experienced that feeling of missing something or someone so much that you feel physical pain in your chest or in your stomach. Like, it hurts to think of it, and that's exactly the way that Jackson feels. That tells us a lot, because he didn't get that feeling when he was going around the tenements in Glasgow, did he? The next section is the drinkers on the veranda, the sky large and open and protective, the place where one knew where one was, among Europeans like oneself. So this lists all the things that he misses about Africa, which shows the large number of things that he misses. Again, he never gave us a list or anything like that about Glasgow. He kind of reminisced about Glasgow, had some flashbacks about it, thought back to his courting days when he first started dating Mrs. Jackson, but in the present, it's Africa that he can list all of the positive attributes that he misses, not Glasgow. And I wanted to pick out this last little bit here, where one was among Europeans like oneself, and like I said, it shows that it isn't the country of Africa that he feels at home in, it's being surrounded by like-minded people. I know this is cut off a little bit at the bottom there, guys, so I'm going to put this PowerPoint up on the Teams page so that you can see it, okay? Alright, so I've linked a Microsoft Forms quiz into the daily instructions part of the Teams page for today. So what I would like you to do is pause the presentation here, go away and have a go at that quiz. The quiz is based on all of the things that I've just talked about in the last wee while, just all of the last slides, okay? So you should be up to date on everything, and you should be getting full marks on it. So pause this here, go and have a look at the quiz. Welcome back, guys. Now that you've done that quiz, I would like you to go off and use your knowledge about the endings of the short stories and consolidate that into a task. I would like you to do this task where possible in class notebook. So you can either type it straight onto class notebook under the set text section under your own name, or you can write it by hand. I don't mind you doing that, and then taking a photo of it and then putting it up in class notebook. If you're able to get access to class notebook, please, please, please do your work in class notebook, because it makes it so much more straightforward and simple for me to mark. If you send me stuff in an email, it's so much more fiddly for me to actually give you feedback on it. I know that for one or two of you, you don't actually have access to class notebook, which is a technical issue, and that's fine for those people to email me their work. But if that's not you, please do your work in class notebook in the first instance. So this is your task for today. So I want you to use the quotations that I gave you earlier in the presentation to answer the following, okay? That's a wee typo, I've put that in twice, so just answer the following. You should have been copying down the tables with the brief summaries and the quotations for each of the endings for each of the short stories. So if you've not done that yet, please go back and make sure that you have a note of that, okay? It's very, very important that when we're thinking about links in the stories, that you either make your own notes from these presentations that I'm going to do, or you take the notes from the presentations and annotate them onto your own short stories, however it is that you do it. But don't just sit and not take notes or not write anything, okay? So if you've not done that, go back and do that. So using the quotations earlier in the presentation, I want you to answer this. By referring to all the short stories, explain the impact of the endings on the reader. And your answer should be structured as P paragraphs. Okay, this is a P paragraph. It should be several P paragraphs, because you're going to be talking about different aspects of the short stories. So you may have a paragraph that talks about the symbol of the door, and you talk about the links between mother and son and the red door, then your next paragraph might be about how the short stories create a sense of hope, in which case you can refer to all 4 of the short stories. You might want to talk about how the short stories subvert expectations, and in that case again you could talk about all of the short stories, but remember to differentiate between each of them and say how excuse me, and say how the telegram subverts expectations the most because that has a twist in the tale, and how the other short stories still subvert expectations but to different degrees. Okay, so make sure that you have several different paragraphs depending on what your point is, and please use a paragraph structure. I'll be online with you after you've finished watching this video. So please ask me any questions, give me a shout if you need any help. Okay, thanks guys.